wealthy families have been utilizing whole life insurance for hundreds of years. And it's because wealthy people understand the value of using non-correlated assets, which is why the bond market is what it is. A non-correlated asset is simply something that is not moved by the ebbs and flows of the market. So there's not volatility like there would be in the stock market and things like that. So having something that is not connected to a volatile market is where predictability can be created in what you're going to build and everything like that. For anybody who's wondering, hey, what's the risk in infinite banking? It's your human behavior. It's how you treat your system, which is why think long term. Don't be afraid to capitalize. Don't steal from yourself. Don't do business with banks. And rethink your thinking. Those are the 5 principles that Nelson laid out in the book.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Legends podcast with your hosts, Nate, Brandon, and Brock. Remember, our insights are not direct financial advice, so consult with your financial team before making any decisions based on the topics discussed in this show.
Welcome back to Cash Flow Legends. All right, you see just 2 faces this morning. Our esteemed younger babyface partner, Mr. Brock, is traveling today. And so we decided that Nate and I were going to intro our story a little bit about how we got introduced to this book, Becoming Your Own Banker, and what it means to us. So Nate, I know you have yours close to you, as I always do me.
Right here.
What does that book mean to you when you think about 7-ish years ago to today?
Well, years and years ago, when I first was sort of introduced to this idea of personal development, personal growth, and things like that, I'd heard somebody say, like, you'd be surprised how much a $20 book could change your life, because average book costs about $20. And that has never been more true in our lives than when we were introduced to Becoming Your Own Banker. I mean, this 92-page book just completely changed the landscape of our lives in so many different ways. To think back where we were 7 years ago to where we are today, God's providence, his guidance, no doubt has been the center of it all. But being led to this book the way we were and really being open to the information and diving in and going deep and learning, it's just, man, it's really hard to fathom.
That's a good point, Nate. I think a good goal for us right now is just how did we get here? Because if you go back, let's just say 10 years ago, I'm 33, you're 33. I'm a middle school principal. You're a youth pastor. We've got a lot of different things going on. And I would have to say first, it starts with realizing with perspective that what had gotten us to that point, which was great. There was a lot of good things about our faith, our family, our fitness, and our finances in. But we were beginning to recognize that what got us there wasn't going to get us to where we thought we wanted to go next. And so a big part of that was you and I reconnecting, which was around 2017, if I'm remembering correctly. Nate remembers dates way better than me, so I'm always looking at him confirming that. So around 2017, accountability became a part of our relationship. And I know for me specifically, I was at one of the most broken stages of my life in that stage because I had known for sure that I needed the Lord over anything else. And I'd also given up drinking alcohol at the same time. And you and I connected. And at that point, we started realizing because of accountability and things like how we wake up in the morning, when we work out, what we're reading, we realized that accountability was very beneficial to us and reading. But we started talking about this idea of, in 2017-18, a side hustle. So kind of connect those dots for us a little bit, Nate, to how we got to this and why we're sitting here on a podcast talking about it.
A part of our accountability was just making sure that we were always feeding each other positive information, things like that. And so one of the things, part of our story is you were on Twitter at the time, I was not, and you would send me tweets from different people as far as personal development mindset, things like that. And, it was really sort of mind blowing that all of this information was out there, because kind of leading up to that point in my life, I never really been challenged to think about how I thought, and really to think beyond just the here and now and the moment. And so coming across becoming your own banker, in the midst of our accountability, was pretty incredible, because Nelson's number one principle is think long term. And that was something that I had not done a very good job of up to that point in my life. And that started this sort of ripple effect through every other aspect of my life, where I started looking at all the different things that were going on, and not just thinking about the here and now, but more beyond that, and really trying to see where God was working in the midst of relationships and circumstances and things like that.
So along those lines, there's a key piece that I know was very impactful looking back. We actually have talked about it a lot in different ways. Up until that point, I was a middle school principal, had been a head baseball coach, and I was in education with a master's of education, but I didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about how I thought, because I was so busy daily that when I had any downtime, I just wanted to consume, because I was pouring out daily with, being a middle school principal and the things that come along with that. So I wasn't reading.
You were literally pouring out daily.
100% pouring out the alcohol daily too. That's exactly right. So even though I'm in education at that point, I was not educating myself was not a priority, other than just checking off boxes to get what I needed done. So we began reading. And I think in that first year, Nate, and this is now I would say reading just to read is less important. More important is what you're processing when you read and how you apply it. But I think in that first year between the two of us, we probably read over 50 or 60 books. And we were just constantly brainstorming and growing. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt, if you're listening to this now and you're like, man, I just feel like there's something else and I want to grow, start reading and investing in yourself. That will not, even if it's just 5 pages a day or 5 minutes a day, that will not return void, especially if it's reading about things that you're interested in, that you think may be out there that you don't know about. So for Nate and I, we had a background in money in different ways. I was a diehard Dave Ramsey follower. We had applied the principles. We paid off all debt besides our house. Nate and his wife were very familiar, Bree, with Dave Ramsey and applying it. But we both were at this crossroads of like, there's got to be something more before we read Becoming Your Own Banker.
Yeah.
So Nate, why don't you talk about how our accountability, where we were, and how you came across Becoming Your Own Banker, how all that kind of occurred.
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that, because it brought me back to the original question that you said earlier, which was about the side hustle story. So what I was talking about with Twitter is in that time, there was a community on Twitter, and they were very focused on this idea of starting a side hustle and, getting some additional income coming in, things like that. And that was something that I'd thought about a little bit, but not to the degree where I really put a lot of time and effort into thinking about how that might happen. And so you and I coming together in our accountability, we were very much in alignment on this idea of, hey, let's just get some additional income coming in somehow, some way. And both of us being passionate about finance and everything like that, at one point we thought, hey, maybe we could do sort of like a little consulting thing where, we teach people about budgeting and stuff like that. And so we kind of had this idea in the back of our minds of let's partner up and do something like this. And then in December of 2017, I come across this book right here, Becoming Your Own Banker. And that whole idea just got blown up in a really cool way because we were introduced to this revolutionary concept for us, which was the infinite banking concept. And it was all about creating your own private banking system and the value of controlling your money and how peace of mind could be introduced into your life and so much more that we could talk about. But a lot of the concepts that we read about as we were, diving in and researching, it was just brand new. It was just eye opening. It was, I don't really know how to describe it other than just, a revolution in our minds as far as how we were thinking. Someone once said, I felt like my brain got flipped inside out. So we became fascinated with the information that we read. We started researching. We finally found a podcast of all things. You're listening to a podcast right now. So this is a podcast from a podcast because we found a podcast. These two guys, Mike and Chris out of Kansas, and they had a podcast called Life, Success, and Legacy. It was all about becoming your own banker. So we started listening to this podcast and just became very drawn to how genuine they were. They were very matter of fact. There was no sales hype in the conversations. And on top of all that, our stories with Mike and Chris were very closely connected. And we described that when we heard that episode where we got to hear their background stories, we described that as a God wink, where God was just saying, there you go. These are the guys I want you to work with.
So Nate, at that point, 7 years ago, it was not like me specifically to do anything outside of my current comfort zone. And we described you as the gas and me as the brake. And I think over time, we found 7 years later, I'm the brake sometimes, you're the brake sometimes, and I'm the gas, you're the gas sometimes. But then you were full throttle. I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And I don't remember how it all came about exactly, but we ended up connecting with Mike and Chris through the podcast. And we're like, hey, we want to fly down and pick your guys' brain. And we're willing to commit our money, our time, our energy, working full-time jobs, talking to our wives about it, make sure they know we're not going crazy, and fly across, to Kansas.
They weren't convinced at that point that we weren't going crazy.
That's a whole nother story for another day. But they graciously let us go. And we went and spent basically a couple of days with Mike and Chris at what they call their IBC boot camp, Infinite Banking Concept boot camp. And so when you see this book, Becoming Your Own Banker, it's important to know that the becoming your own banker part, the your own, is key, because it's going to be how it fits you in your life best. This could be some foundational principles, but the concept to implement it, Nelson named the infinite banking concept. A little history: wealthy families, and even those who we don't even know are wealthy, have been using this mindset with the product of whole life for hundreds of years. But it's because it's a private contract that you don't have to tell anybody about it. So it's not something that receives mainstream attention. But when we started realizing, Nate, that whole life was the thing that people put their money in until about 1975, 1980, pretty consistently, we started going, oh, there's some things we just think we know that aren't true, or there's some things we know that are half truths. And so a big part of our story was flying to Kansas and watching those guys who at that point had been teaching and living Becoming Your Own Banker and Infinite Banking for probably 15 years, roughly, Nate, together?
Combined about 20, yeah.
Okay. And they were so gracious to give us some of their time with no expectation other than, hey, if this makes sense to you guys, it'll be life-changing if you're willing to change your thinking. And I would say anybody listening to this, if you hear this, that is probably one of the things that's most important. You've heard Nate mention think long range. It's not meaning this can't be beneficial in the first 6 months. But thinking long range is thinking beyond our nose. And the other thing is rethink your thinking. That's one of the 5 main principles that Nelson talks about a ton in his book. So I want to touch on Nelson real quick, and then Nate, I'll let you tie us up. So Nelson Nash is somebody that all of this little bitty community we're in, because it's not a big community, because a lot of people have misunderstandings about the truth of whole life. It all kind of came from Nelson, who passed away at 87, Nate, I think, about
In 2019.
2019. Okay.
Yeah.
So we didn't get to meet Nelson personally. We barely missed him. But Mike and Chris, our mentors in Kansas, were mentored by him, knew him well. They could call him. He stayed at their house, those kind of things. And because our community is so small, because it's such a outside the box to norm thinking community, we have been blessed to meet people that knew Nelson over the last 30, 40 years. And in indirect ways or direct ways, they've become our mentors. Names like Garrett Gunderson, who's a New York Times bestseller, Trent Fortner, who mentored Garrett, Bob Castellone, who mentored Trent and Garrett, and Brock, who's on this podcast with us, and Mike and Chris, and James Nethery, who has his own podcast with Ryan Griggs.
Jason Lowe, Richard Canfield.
Jason Lowe, Richard Canfield in Canada,
People
because
that
Canada
we're
and America.
pretty closely connected to.
Yeah. So we began to realize then that if there's any truth to this, we need to implement it first. And we figured out real quick between our families and us individually in our business that somebody's going to control the banking function. It's going to be somebody else, or it's going to be us. And Nate, here's what I love about this 92-page book is the first half of it spends its time talking about how we think. Because if we don't understand it's a thinking problem first, then everything else won't make sense. And that is a key piece of this book. So we keep this handy because it's not something you read once.
And something that I think is really important to understand, because some people are like, what is the risk in doing something like this? And what I tell people is the risk is your own human behavior. It's how you treat it. Because as Brandon said earlier, wealthy families have been utilizing whole life insurance for hundreds of years. And it's because wealthy people understand the value of using non-correlated assets, which is why the bond market is what it is. A non-correlated asset is simply something that is not moved by the ebbs and flows of the market. So there's not volatility like there would be in the stock market and things like that. So having something that is not connected to a volatile market is where predictability can be created in what you're going to build and everything like that. And so for anybody who's wondering, hey, what's the risk in infinite banking? It's your human behavior. It's how you treat your system, which is why think long term. Don't be afraid to capitalize. Don't steal from yourself. Don't do business with banks. And rethink your thinking. Those are the 5 principles that Nelson laid out in the book. And Nelson was a man of faith and a man of wisdom. And one thing we love hearing stories about Nelson is that he would much rather tell you about his faith than infinite banking. And that is something that is very near and dear to us, because we would rather point people to Jesus than point people to whole life insurance. If both of those things happen, that's great, but we're much more concerned about your spiritual condition.
That's right. That's a great reminder, Nate, of this reality that everything that we do in life, anybody listening, it is going towards a purpose, whether we realize it or not. It is tied to who we are and what we're created to do or not do, whether we're aware of it or not. And one of the things that we love about what we get to do daily is we encourage people to get clear on what does wealth and freedom mean to you? Because if you don't know that, then anything else we do is just guessing. And then when we get clear on what wealth and freedom means, can we come up with a path that shows what my wealth and freedom is tied to, related to my faith, my family, my fitness, and my finances. Now, some people add in fun, some people add in fellowship, but it's just an easy way to go. I want to go this way. And I think it's in line with what I'm created to do. So anybody listening, we have found that you come to this one of 2 ways, typically as a big, 2 categories. You're experiencing pain and you don't know how to get out of what you've been dealing with, or you're already experiencing success and you're like, I wonder if it could be better. The answer to both of those is yes, it can help, but it goes right back to what Nate said. We have to be willing to rethink our thinking, and we have to be willing to unlearn things that may not be completely true, which then makes us different than 80 to 90% of the world.
If you've been listening to our show in the past, you know that we've mentioned this idea of walking through the book, Becoming Your Own Banker. And the reason why we're talking about this today is because this is our introduction to that series that we're going to be going through, where we're going to essentially be going page by page, section by section through the book and breaking down some of the concepts that are in there. And so if you've never read Becoming Your Own Banker, or maybe you have read it, either way, we hope this is going to be really valuable for you.
Yeah, and we never take lightly that you are sharing your time with us. It's so humbling for Nate and I to think that somebody could come to this concept and want to implement it the same way we did through Mike and Chris's podcast, Life, Success, and Legacy. If you want to get started on your own and go, what are these jokers talking about? What is Becoming Your Own Banker? Go to cashflowlegends.com and you can find anything you need there. If you're somebody who likes to make a connection first, get on Nate's schedule. Get to know Nate. Get to see what he knows about it. Y'all visit. I cannot emphasize enough, if you're ever thinking about doing anything major or drastically different, the people you're working with are as, if not more important than the concept and the mindset they're telling you to implement. So get to know us. We may not be a good fit, but we might can introduce you to somebody who is. And we know tons of people that love to teach this just like we do. So we're very grateful for your time. If this was beneficial in any way, it makes you excited, hit like, subscribe, and all those things. If you got any questions in the comments, because you don't mind having that forward-facing conversation, put it in the comments, and we will respond to there too. And we hope you enjoy this as we continue to go through this. We're going to also hear Brock's story and how he came to becoming your own banker, which is a different angle than us, but it also allows a huge blessing as we're all communicating and working together. So until the next one, we will see you then.